This is where Denton's rural firefighter and town commissioner Bo Carter says he lost his battle against the west wind fire that tore through town just a few days after Thanksgiving in 2021.
Getting pickups.
And then the wind picked up, and then the wind picked up, and then the wind picked up. All of a sudden, this same area that we've been fighting for quite a while, you can just see large coals launching straight across the road at basically a horizontal line. And once that happened, once the 2-foot tall crested wheatgrass had that first ember hit it, it was over. And it started running down the railroad track.
A downed power line sparked the prairie fire a few miles outside the central Montana town west of Lewistown. More than 10,000 acres were consumed by the flames, along with 25 homes. When Denton's iconic grain elevators along the railroad caught fire, flames started falling from the sky.
You can't see, you can't hear, and then all of a sudden, there's fireballs raining from the sky, starting pockets of fire here and there, areas that were near no other fire, areas that shouldn't have burned.
The conditions were ripe for wildfire that day, a buildup of dry grasses and strong winds. When conditions like these ignite, a fire can quickly get out of control. And when a wildfire starts moving through a community, burning structure to structure, it turns into something else, an urban conflagration.
These fires that are making headlines, like the Lahaina fire, the fires in California, those urban conflagrations are happening so fast that unless you have all those resources deployed right there, they're not going to be available for the event. They're going to come filtering into this catastrophe in the making, but it's going to be over before all those resources are deployed. I don't think fire does a terrible job of allocating resources. I mean, it's fairly sophisticated, but I don't know that it's possible to align the resources perfectly with the events that you don't know are going to happen.
That's why emerging wildfire research is emphasizing changes to how homes are built. Studies show the most effective ways to reduce community risk involve managing the built environment with building codes, zoning, and land use planning. At Headwaters Economics, researcher Kimmy Barrett helps show communities how to live with wildfire, because in Montana, it's always going to be a part of the landscape.
And so when you look at how we address this issue at both a state and federal scale, it's predominantly focused on wildlands and on forests, and how can we treat forests to make them more healthy and more adaptive to increasing wildfires. But that's not addressing the problem, because you're still not looking at the homes that are built in those forests and built in those places that are burning down. And so the work we do is really trying to elevate the role of homes, communities, infrastructure, and neighborhoods in what it means for community wildfire risk reduction.
In Big Sky, local leaders are heeding this warning. Here, the local fire department is working to create a community more resilient to fire.
You think of a traditional fire department with community risk reduction, you think about fire prevention, sprinklers, smoke alarms, and all that stuff. And that's very much the case still. But in a community like this, when you're talking about fire prevention, fire prevention, and when you're living in a wildland-urban interface, that wildfire piece has to be a part of that fire prevention as well.
That's why the Big Sky Fire Department is helping the community with development decisions.
A lot of fire departments don't necessarily get involved in land use planning. They don't necessarily get involved in homeowners association when they do covenant updates, right, that are architectural guideline updates and things like that. And I think with living in a state like this where, yes, we have building codes, but they're extremely laxed. And so we have worked in the past with trying to figure out where we could actually leverage, not in an authoritative way, but just in an educational way, not only like county zoning, but also working with subdivisions to say, okay, moving forward, we would like to get some of these things into your subdivision regulations or into your architectural guidelines for non-combustible construction.
Another effective tool is what these Big Sky firefighters are doing here, thinning a forested area near homes. At the state government level, Montana's Department of Natural Resources has also been doing more of this kind of mitigation work in recent years.
We have been able to, thanks to our legislature, in the 2023 legislative session, they passed House Bill 8883, which helped to bolster our fire suppression response and also really emphasize doing additional mitigation work We actually need to actively manage our forests.
House Bill 883 increased the overall suppression fund to about $200 million and allows DNRC to use leftover suppression funds for mitigation. DNRC has also increased its role in active forest management through other funding means, including its involvement in the Good Neighbor Authority program, which allows the state to do forest treatment projects on federally managed lands.
The state of Montana has really taken this program and run with it. The reality is, if we're going to really get at our forest health crisis, we have to take an all hands, all lands type of approach. And I think that's where the state of Montana is so uniquely poised to be able to do that in a really meaningful, historic way.
Barrett's research says these kind of fuel mitigation projects are helpful, but they're not the most effective way to keep homes from burning in a catastrophic fire. She says one of the best things policymakers can do is put more resources into building codes, zoning, and land use planning.
If you spend more money proactively preparing communities and homes before a wildfire, then a disaster does not necessarily have to be part of that sequence. And that's what we're really encouraging, is that paradigm shift in how we start thinking about what it means to live with increasing wildfires.
Fuels mitigation, right, is always going to be something that we need to be doing defensible space projects around existing houses. But in a community like this, where we're seeing this substantial amount of growth, and I think we're only about 50% built out right now. Our biggest impact is on the next 50% of the structures that are going to be built up here. If we can get those built smartly, non-combustible, already with defensible space, with adequate structure spacing, ingress, egress, evacuation routes, and all that stuff, that's going to be a much bigger impact than us just going and doing mitigation work here and there.
There's another tactic that experts say is among the best: prescribed fire. But that tool becomes less available as communities spread into the wildlands. This is one of the many ways that the decisions people make about where to live complicates the work of fire managers.
The public is starting to come to terms with that they need to be more responsible for taking care of themselves in the face of these fires. But in the end, it's just very difficult for fire managers to facilitate the interaction between wildfire and community. So once community goes in, it changes everything. That's why when I hear we need to put roads in to get to, so we can respond to fires more quickly and stuff, it just makes me cringe, because in my observation, the only place that fire is easy to manage is where you don't have that stuff. As soon as you put access in, you have created a problem for yourself.
And even places we don't think of as wildland communities are still at risk, such as population centers like Billings.
We do know that there are 9 different communities or population areas here in the state that have the exact same characteristics as what was evidenced in the Lahaina fire and the LA fire and these urban conflagrations, in terms of looking at structure density and housing footprint, where fuel loading is occurring and vegetation cover, where wind might be a propagating factor there. And so just because it hasn't happened at scale here in Montana doesn't mean it can't happen.
And the risks are present in both the forests and the grasslands.
Most wildfires actually occur on grass and rangelands. About 60% of wildfires do. And so when you think through wildfire likelihood, where could it occur? It's across the board. There is no certain area in Montana that is necessarily safe or less wildfire prone than other areas.
DNRC provides wildfire protection for 60 million acres of private and state land across the state. But that looks very different depending on where you are.
Western Montana, we do a lot of direct protection. For Eastern Montana, we work really closely with local and volunteer firefighters to be able to provide firefighting support. So what that looks like is we actually work quite a bit to provide them with resources.
But when the West Wind fire ripped through Denton, the main resource of the initial attack were personal ranch trucks with big water jugs on the back.
And we did not have what we needed here. Our roads were in terrible condition. Not having those road graders and the roads up to code was a disaster. Not having one out here to doze in fire lines, because that is the best way to prevent a prairie fire from escaping, from expanding. Fire mitigation is a very, very real thing. And it isn't just on the landowner. It's on the local government to follow through with what we're paying for. And in these rural areas, that means roads and having the equipment and infrastructure in place to fight these.
Montana's rural communities face additional hurdles to mitigate wildfire risk on a community scale. Dwindling populations mean less people are managing large swaths of land. And the laundry list of community upgrades can be a major undertaking for smaller communities. You can still see evidence of the West Wind fire in the blackened corners of homes, the lots that remain empty, the grain elevators missing on the skyline. They're stark reminders of how uncontrollable fires can be and the damage they can do.
I was the one that relayed to the town that it was time to evacuate. Being in that room and seeing all those faces and the sudden realization that this isn't just a fire. This is a nightmare.
For Impact, I'm Hannah Kearse.